You could probably tell on these podcasts by now that I do the introduction post me recording the episode. I have to think about the intro as I'm going through, and I'm going to steal the title for this episode from Phil Jones, who we actually recently were at conference with, and he gave me a great line. Is that I think that this podcast can be named "Don't Point Out the Elephant in the Room" or talk about it. Ride in on the elephant. That's all I'm going to leave you with. Hopefully you enjoy the podcast. Welcome to Rethink Real Estate. My name is Ben Brady, and this is a real estate podcast aimed to deliver sales strategies, marketing tips, and business insights from industry experts and myself to build a listing-focused business for the future. Let's get into it. Welcome back to another episode of Rethink Real Estate. So today I wanted to walk through just one of the strategies that we've been using a little bit more lately within our business when we're pitching to sellers. Now, again, for those of you that are new welcoming into the podcast, is that my job at the moment is transitioned back to being in front of sellers doing multiple listing presentations a day via Zoom, presenting our non-distressed auction platform. Now that's with either, sellers that are looking to sell their piece of real estate or agents that are looking to, put another tool in their tool belt. And one of the things, and definitely the strategy that I've fallen back into, this was a strategy that I used when selling real estate. It was definitely an angle that I found really appropriate in the early days of my real estate journey. And the reason I found it appropriate is because in the early days of my real estate journey, I didn't have a lot of success behind me. I was very, very young, 18 years of age, speaking to people where most of the time they had kids that were older than me, selling their biggest asset. And my business owner at the time gave me the advice and gave me a sort of a strategy that really helped. Bill Cooper, who was the business owner along with Mel Rodrigo of Harcourts Western Suburbs, which is a few offices on the western suburb of Brisbane, Queensland, Australia. He said, "Look, Ben, going into a listing presentation, you're already on the back foot, considering you've got pimples on your face and you can barely, you barely fit into your suit. However, that said, is that I think that you could take a different angle with not going down all of the success that, our company has had or anything along those lines. Most agents get into a living room and all they do is talk about how great they are or how good of a negotiator they are or anything along those lines. Is that you go down the route of actually talking about what you've seen fail locally, or properties that you've seen sit on the marketplace for a period of time and do multiple price reductions that then has ended up netting the seller less money. Properties that have expired on the marketplace. And we came up with a little bit of a script for this, in the listing presentation, that if you're sitting there in front of a seller, is that, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, look, today I could go through all of the success that we've had as an organization and I could show you our success. And I know that that's really important to validate whether or not I'm the right person to represent you as previous success. But the one thing, with your permission, that I'd like to do is that I can leave all of that successful material with you that you can review later. But I'd like to go through and point out some of the properties that haven't really sold or haven't really gotten good outcomes, or that have failed essentially locally. Some of the situations that we have seen locally, some of the situations that we've even been in, being completely transparent, is that, and how we've learnt from those and how we'll make sure that those situations will not happen in this scenario of you selling your property. Is it okay if I take that angle today? Some people feel very uncomfortable with how raw that is, I'll be honest. That's why you've got to be prepared to take it in both directions, okay? When I talk to somebody at the moment in front of them, the first thing that they're trying to do with our process most of the time is sort of define to themselves, well, why I don't need non-distressed auction. I'm not in a position where I have to sell, or an agent being in a position where I don't need your help. I can get this thing sold on my own, all of those different elements here. So there's a defensive nature around the relationship when we're first pitching auction in the first case. And to show your own level of vulnerability of where you haven't sold something, or you basically eradicate the objections before they come by going through what is coming. What if I put the bidding to start from price too low? what if people believe that I absolutely have to sell, and I only get people that are looking for an investment, flipping, wholesaling, or looking for a deal. All of the negative connotations that come around the word auction, getting ahead of those by showing some failures, okay, in the sense of properties that haven't sold and how we've learnt from those, but steering those failures around. Really, it all of a sudden came down to sellers' expectations and them not willing to listen to the marketplace, certainly for auction. And it also comes down to the listing agent, running that property as a traditional listing and not abiding by the process of not displaying price to people and gathering as many people as possible. They lost certain people because they told them to go away, which they ended up going and buying a property of the similar value elsewhere. So we missed that opportunity by simply not embracing absolutely everybody to the property to get them emotionally connected. There's a whole gamut of things that we can go through to sort of push away that negative, push away those objections by actually heading them off at the pass. Okay. Phil Jones, who we had the pleasure of listening to recently at a live event, he's like, point out the elephant, place the elephant in the room. Don't just point it out, place the elephant in the room or ride in on the elephant. Okay. And I think that this is a strategy of riding in on the elephant. Okay. I really like that terminology. And if we're applying it to just your real estate practice or you're applying it to any industry that you're ultimately in, I think taking a position of that, hey, we've got lots of success that I can show you, but I'm sure already that everyone else that you've interviewed for this position is actually, or interviewed for this job of selling your property, has probably shared with you why they are the greatest people in the world. And I believe that our greatness as a company comes from reviewing the situations not only that happen internally, but also happen externally within each individual marketplace of what hasn't sold and why it didn't sell, or if it did sell, why was it undersold? Okay, or why did it spend longer period of days on market? Because we can see the depreciation of a property very quickly if it spends a longer period of time on marketplace. Or you can see that the moment that they did a price reduction, they lost a whole bunch of leverage in the negotiation that they would have had with a buyer that walked in the door. They didn't hold strong on their price for long enough because at the end of the day, they were allowed to place a price that probably wasn't attainable in the first place. You can go down so many different avenues here, but what it really stems back to the thought process that I wanted to go through today, it's actually wanting to be a little bit more, wanting to monitor those transactions that don't go as well. Actually taking note and going through the transactions that you see either in your core marketplace that you're targeting, okay? Or maybe you could go back and review anything that stayed on the marketplace for a longer period of time, okay, within days on marketplace and sold that's outside of the average. Maybe you could have a look at the average number of price reductions, okay? And if they've done 1 or 2 price reductions, why was the second price reduction? Why did that come around? Was it because they put it on too high and they only did a smaller reduction in the beginning? You can actually really show the depth of your knowledge into the real estate, into the practice of real estate, if you dive deeper into that marketplace and the reason that other properties haven't sold. Now, if you really wanted to be vulnerable, point out the reasons that you've seen some properties in the past not sell with you. I think that level of vulnerability and that level of openness with your sellers, I think that they could really embrace. Now, could you lose some listings from it? Maybe. But if somebody just wants the person that's going to stand there and beat their chest about why they are the greatest, I don't think that you guys would have been a fit in the first place. And you'll probably, it's like one of those things where you get caught up into this cycle of just saying the same thing that everyone else says. And I don't think that that's something that any of us want to do. We want a point of difference, hence the reason so many people embrace auction as a different element of sale. Whether they do it first up or they don't, is that they do it later on down the track, but it gives them something different to talk about in the presentation that actually gets the seller to listen to you rather than, hey, this is the same old thing and it's the same old story that everybody presents. So as we reflect on just different approaches, I think that there's this element of actually being able to dive into the failures and taking that angle. I think that right there could be a refreshing view of when you're in highly competitive listings. It could be a refreshing view when, you just have a seller that you really want, like maybe you're not connecting with them. Okay. Maybe, those appointments where you're simply talking to somebody and hey, look, they really couldn't give a shit whether I'm here or I'm not. Maybe you take it down that angle to really get their attention. Okay. It is a really honest part of the transition of real estate. It's like one of those moments where if I was to think about a moment where I could really get a seller to sit up and listen to me, is that I'd ask them, hey, did you test drive your car? Yes, I did. Why wouldn't you test drive your listing agent to see whether or not they're the appropriate negotiator to get you every single cent out of the marketplace? Because this all comes down to peace of mind. Okay, peace of mind that you've seen every person through the front door and that I've handled the process perfectly in order to get you the most amount of money. So why don't we go through a situation of negotiation and you can test drive me to make sure that I'm the right person for you. Now, again, you've got to have the level of confidence. You've got to have the borderline, the level of cockiness in order to pull that off. And if you don't, then you need to reflect a little bit further. I think I've mentioned that on the podcast before, but this is another angle to get them to pay attention. And I think that it could really help. Hopefully it's useful, guys. See you next time on Rethink Real Estate. So about 75% of our audience hasn't liked, followed, or subscribed to our podcast. It would mean the world to us, and it would help this podcast more than you know to expand our reach if you were to like, follow, or subscribe on any of the platforms that you're watching or listening on. Thanks again.